Hi everyone, it's Leah here, and I'm here today to talk about anxiety and ADHD. Many of you know that that's my speciality. I've worked with people with anxiety for quite a long time, and then more recently, after my own diagnosis of ADHD, started to recognise that there's a bit of a gap really for people who have ADHD in terms of things that are effective for us. I was going to say them, but it is us, of course, in terms of helping with anxiety. So I wanted to explain a little bit today about anxiety and ADHD, and what the links are, or, and in particular, what anxiety is. And as I started to plan the video and plan what I was going to say, I realised that actually it's a really huge topic, and I could probably do an hour-long epic on it, but I won't talk to you with that right now. I'm going to try and keep it actually relatively simple and relatively straightforward. So I'm going to talk to you about what anxiety is, what's going on in the brain, why do we feel anxiety, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about how ADHD links into that. And as always, if there's things that you want to know more about, things that you think I could explain in a different way to be more helpful to you, or anything else besides, please do feel free to get in touch. And you can do that either by commenting below here, or you can get in touch on my website, which is leahleaves.com, or you can email me at leah@leahleaves.com. And hopefully my lovely tech people will be able to put that up for you on the screen here now. So anxiety, what is it? I mean, we all recognise anxiety, whether you're somebody that's experienced a sort of chronic level of anxiety, or whether you've just experienced that kind of temporary anxiety that comes along with, perhaps doing a big presentation or going to an important interview. We all recognise those physical symptoms of maybe our heart racing, our breathing changing, tummy flipping over. And also the kind of psychological changes, the overthinking, the worrying, all those kinds of things. And I think I'll cover that separately in a different video as to what the symptoms of anxiety are. But for now, I'm going to assume you already know what that is. And of course, it's very different in terms of our experience when we're just having very temporary anxiety over a specific situation, and when we're actually experiencing anxiety that's affecting us day in, day out over weeks, months or years. And it may or may not surprise you to know that within the brain, actually a very similar thing is happening, but it's the cause that's different. So my focus is going to be on the kind of longer term sort of chronic anxiety that really affects people's day-to-day lives. By the way, before I go on, apologies for my voice. It's really, I'm about 3 weeks into one of those illnesses that's affected my voice. It gets quite scratchy at times, and there'll probably be times I have to clear my throat. So huge apologies for that, but I shall keep going. Anxiety. Well, basically, anxiety, and actually stress as well, stress comes grouped in under the same category, is a response from the primitive protective systems in our brain. Okay, and if you haven't already, I encourage you to have a look at my recent video, What is Hypnotherapy? Because there I'll talk about the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. But basically, the unconscious mind is a huge part of what's going on for us, and it's a bit that goes under the radar, so we're not really aware of it happening. And this primitive protective part of the brain is part of that, so it's very separate to the bit that we recognise as us, our thinking mind. And basically, this primitive protective part of the mind It's not ours. It doesn't belong to us as humans. We share it with lots of other animals, and its main job is there to protect us from really big physical threats to our survival. So, to give you an example, if you were walking along the street and you were cornered by a tiger that was escaped from the zoo, this very primitive part of the mind works lightning fast, much faster than your slower, clever thinking mind. And so it would immediately recognize that tiger as a massive threat to you. And because of the threat being so huge, it would actually step in, it would take over, and you'd actually lose your thinking mind. You wouldn't be able to access your thinking mind. Everything would be running from this primitive protective part of the brain. And you'd be really pleased about that, because actually that's the bit that's going to get you away safe. It's going to very quickly make the changes in you physically and mentally that allow you to be fast and efficient. And by the time you catch up consciously, you're going to be halfway gone. You're going to be, nearly safe. And you're going to be pretty pleased to recognise that response has happened. And that's what it's for. It's for this kind of threat to our survival that we would have actually experienced a lot more often, or at least our ancestors would have experienced a lot more often back in, more primitive times. And the thing is that what tends to happen is this primitive part of the mind, because it's not ours, because it doesn't really understand our humanness. So it doesn't understand our imagination, doesn't understand our emotional and social connections, definitely doesn't understand the modern day world. And so what happens is it starts to pick up on all kinds of other threats, things that actually aren't threats that it can help with. So they're not kind of immediate physical threat, and it will pick up on those and it will still try and help you. It will still try and step in. And that's really the basis of where anxiety comes from. So what is it about us and our modern lives that causes this primitive protective part of the mind to step in and help us with things that aren't a physical threat? And the short answer is it's actually our thought processes in the main that cause this perception of threat. So whenever we have any kind of emotional thought, that is actually something that's picked up on by this primitive part of the mind. So if we have an emotional thought that is, oh my God, this is so beautiful, I'm really happy about it, then the primitive part of the mind is going to say, yeah, we can disregard that. That's completely safe for us. Whereas if we have the kinds of emotional thoughts that we would categorise as, say, worries or ruminations over the past. So if we're worrying about what tomorrow is going to be like, or, what our ADHD assessment consultation is going to be like, or what, our boss is going to say to us tomorrow, or perhaps we're ruminating over last week when we blew our top and upset our partner, or whatever it might be. All these thoughts create emotion, and actually they create imagery in our mind as well. And this protective part of the mind picks up on those, it sees them, and it starts to respond. So at the time when we're experiencing a situation that creates emotional threat, we will get a primitive mind response. But actually it's more than that, because every emotional thought we have gets accumulated and gets stored. And it's those negative emotional thoughts that come from worrying about the future, ruminating about the past, that tend to accumulate and stack up. And the more that we've got stacked up, and we can imagine like a stress bucket, an idea that we've got this kind of storage system, and the fuller that storage system is, the more that your protective systems perceive that life is threatening, and the more involved they get into your day-to-day life. So they're much more likely to respond to things, and they're much more likely to respond in a bigger way. And of course, because it's all happening under the radar, and because it's an accumulation of potentially lots of different thoughts and situations that have stacked up in the bucket that have led to this, rather than I'm going to an interview now. It's really hard for us to understand what's causing it, and hard to know how to change that. And I'm not going to go too deeply into how to change it. In fact, I'm not going to go into how to change it at all right now. But, you know, there are things that your brain does in order to process these emotional thoughts away. But often what happens is we get into a point where the brain can only do so much. It can only process a certain amount per day, for instance, more accurately, actually, per night. And so if we're overloading the system with emotional thoughts, then this stress bucket is going to fill and our primitive mind is going to be much more active. Now, probably some of you are already ahead of me here, because if you've got ADHD, you know that what this is not a disorder of anything, really. It's just that the parts of your mind that are there to slow impulses, to sort of steer how the brain works, and to inhibit, that was the word I was looking for, to inhibit impulse, isn't working properly. And because of that, that means that we tend to have many more emotional thoughts. We tend to respond much more quickly, and therefore we tend to fill our bucket much more quickly. And so we are much more likely to suffer with anxiety. And then when the anxiety hits, in other words, when that primitive part of the mind is reacting, then we have much less ability to inhibit it, to say, hey, you know, this isn't appropriate here. Actually, this isn't something I need to worry about. There was something else I wanted to say about that too, and I forgot what it was because I just looked at the clock and realised I've been talking way too long, and I need to go because I've got somebody waiting for me. But as far as ADHD goes, there's so many things that contribute to anxiety. Oh, and that was what I wanted to say, that anxiety actually contributes to ADHD too. So we're much more likely to develop anxiety because of the way that we think and the way that our brain operates. We're much less likely to be able to take control of those anxiety responses once they occur. And then also we get this horrible vicious cycle, which means that if we're suffering with anxiety, then it tends to worsen our ADHD symptoms. So I'm going to go because I'm out of time. But thank you so much for listening, and join me next week for more interesting, hopefully, information on anxiety and ADHD. Thank you. Bye.